Thanks for joining, and we're going to kick it off in a couple of seconds here. We're going to talk about how to use eState to deal with life insurance, and specifically solely owned life insurance we're going to deal with today. And so I'm going to share my screen as I typically do here, and we'll get going. So, first thing to talk about when we're talking about life insurance is how do we show a life insurance asset being owned by a client? So, we would go to the asset tab for Spencer Jefferson, and we would add uh, under financial assets life insurance. And we're talking about life insurance that's owned by the testator here. We're not talking about life insurance that's owned by someone else for owned by the testator on someone else's life. We're talking about their own life. So we're going to just click life insurance, own life, select. And then as every asset has an eState, its own kind of checklist for life insurance. Whenever it sees that there's an identical asset with the same name, it's going to add the word copy on there so that it can differentiate. What I typically do is I'll change this to be the amount of the policy or the policy number, if there are multiple ones, or just some way for the client to see when we're planning which policy we're talking about. But before we change the name, what I'll do is I'll go and I'll pick the life insurance company. So these are the ones we have. You can also leave that blank. It's not required, but let's just say Canada Life. You can put in the policy number as well. You can indicate the owner. You can indicate whose life it's on, who the life insured is, the policy type. Is it permanent? Is it term? These aren't going to affect the drafting in any way, but they're just for you to keep track of, and basically the amount of the policy. So let's say this is $1 million policy. Now, you might say to me, well, hold on a second. We're going to get, there's no probate tax because we're going to designate a beneficiary. Well, as with any eState asset, it automatically calculates the probate tax. And depending on what you do with it, it's going to show the tax being saved or not being saved, depending on the beneficiary designation. Okay. So that's how you put in the information. I typically don't put in any other information other than the insurance company and the policy number. And up here, I might change the name here to be the, Canada Life $1 million policy. This is not going to populate anywhere except to show on the screen. So that's why I don't worry too much about it. The identification of the insurance policy in the drafting is going to come from the name of the company and the policy number. So that's how we do how we add a life insurance asset. So now, how do we then designate beneficiaries? So let's start as we do always. We go one scenario by first, and then the next, and then the next. So we'll start with what to do with the insurance if Spencer is survived by Sarah, his wife. So what we would do, it's a designated asset. So it goes in the joint and designated asset group. And we're going to just find the asset. There it is, the Canada Life $1 million policy. I'm going to click on it and I'm going to drag it and I'm going to drop it in Sarah's box. Let me show you what if we were starting from scratch and we didn't have Sarah set up, what you would see. You'd see this. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to grab that life insurance policy, drop it in the green box here, and then we're going to pick the beneficiary. So for life insurance, there are 3 categories of beneficiaries. We don't allow class gifts. The reason being, the insurance company, if they're confronted with divide this among my children or my issue or something like that, they won't get involved in that. They don't know who your children are. They don't know who to pay it to. And so they don't want to deal with class gifts. Instead, you have to identify the people that you want to benefit here. And so, for example, let's just say we're going to pick I'm just trying to think of there's Sarah. And I'm going to pick Sarah as the beneficiary. So I'm going to show you a person beneficiary first. So I'm going to pick Sarah. And this is a very straightforward kind of gift. This says to the insurance company, pay this life insurance to Sarah if Sarah's alive. Okay. Very simple gift to a single person. Okay. I'm going to show you in the second scenario how you can do more complicated ones. But that's how you would designate Sarah as the beneficiary of a life insurance policy. Same way you could designate two people. You could say, for example, for this policy, we could designate Callie and James as the beneficiary. Okay, so you can do it that way. Again, these are simple, straightforward designations of beneficiaries, right? Insurance companies are not in the business of interpreting gift overs and things like that. And so they just want to know, who do I pay it to? And that's why we have to keep it simple for insurance companies on this front. What happens if we want something a little bit more complicated? So let's try in our descendants only. I'm going to get rid of that and I'll show you. So here we're starting from scratch. Now, you have kind of two or three typical kinds of plans here. You could say, take my life insurance and let me just grab it and drop it in here. And I could pick my children as the beneficiaries. So I want it to go to Jimmy, Mindy, those two are my two kids. And that would be just your typical divided equally, Jimmy, Mindy, okay, or all to the survivor. So again, insurance companies don't get into gift overs like then divided per stirpes among the kids. Like they're going to have no idea who to pay it to, and they're going to pay it into court if they're not sure. So that's why we don't allow for complicated gift overs for, gift overs for named people. If instead you said to me, well, I actually want to build in a more complicated designation, you would not name them specifically. Instead, you would use one of our other options. So I'm going to remove this for a second. So I'm going to drag this life insurance in here. And you'll see in the other category, this is the more, so these aren't specifically people that were designated. These are different other options. So one option is to just designate your estate as the beneficiary. So you might want to do that, for example, in a situation where a client is in a hurry, they're separated from their spouse. You just want to make sure that the life insurance policy goes into the estate, and you want to change the beneficiary designation. That's how you could designate the estate as the beneficiary. And that might make sense, depending on the size of the life insurance policy, your considerations of the graduated rate estate situations, and how that might play into separate insurance designations. So there's a bunch of things that might impact whether you would name the estate as the beneficiary. But if you wanted to, that's how you do it. In the other tab, there's a couple of other options. One is, and I'm going to go with this one, which is the trustees for residue. So and it's pretty typical, I say, listen, if my spouse is not alive, since my kids are getting everything in a trust with, there's provisions there about different ages and all those things and gift overs, it's complicated. I want the life insurance paid to a person, trustee, to receive that money and then deal with it on the same terms as the residue of my estate. Okay. So I would do that. And in this case, what would happen if my spouse wasn't alive and I had descendants only? The trustee, who would be, well, it wouldn't be Sarah, it would be Nick, because Sarah's not alive at this stage, right? Sarah's gone, because we know that because we're in the descendants only scenario. Okay. So Nick would be the trustee. Nick would receive the money, and then he would deal with it on the same terms as the residue of the estate, which means hold it in trust for younger kids, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, whatever the terms of the residue are. Okay. So if that's what we wanted, we would probably want that not only in the descendants only scenario, but we'd probably also want that same provision in the no descendants. If we had no kids, we'd still want it to go into the residue the way we provided for that in the no descendants scenario, right? And so what you could do there is simply copy it to the no descendants scenario. Okay. So what that's going to say is, listen, regardless, I want it to go to, regardless of who's alive, if my spouse is not alive, I want it paid to Nick, who's the trustee, and he's going to receive it and then deal with it as if it formed part of the residue of the estate, but as a separate trust fund. Okay. So that way, what's the benefit of that? It removes the probate tax. Okay. in that scenario. So that's the idea. That's if you want it to be exactly on the same terms as if it had fallen into the estate in the first place. Okay. I'm just going to show you the drafting for that, just so you can see. So let me just update this, and then we'll talk about life insurance policies, etc. So this says, let me see if I'm doing this is the one. So this says, here's the designation. We had it first going to my spouse if she was alive, right? Then, if she wasn't alive, we want it paid to the alternate trustee. We know Sarah's not alive, so it's going to be paid to the alternate trustee. It's going to be paid to Nick, who's the insurance trustee, and he is instructed to deal with it as a separate trust fund to be administered, though, in the same manner and on the same terms as I provided for the residue, set out in my will. Now, if you're doing multiple wills, you might want to say set out in my secondary will. It doesn't really matter, but it highlights it for you. If you're doing multiple wills, you'll unhighlight it and leave in secondary will. If you're doing a single will, you'll just remove the highlighting so it reads my will. Because at this point, eState doesn't know what other documents you're planning on generating, so it doesn't know if you're doing multiple wills for the client or not. So that's why it highlights it and puts it in. So that's what it would look like if you designate the trustee for residue. Okay. If you see that this is blank, for example, that's because you didn't name an alternate estate trustee. You only had Sarah in there. And if you only had Sarah, eState knows that Sarah's not alive in this scenario. So it's not going to say pay it to Sarah because Sarah's not alive. So it removes Sarah automatically and puts in the alternate. But if you have no alternate, it's going to leave it blank. Okay. So that if you ever come across that, that's what's going on there. So you can generate that as a separate insurance designation, right? We have something called a life insurance declaration, and that is a separate document. For example, a separate document that you sign independently of the will. Okay. Some people prefer that. Other people like it in their will. There's the designation in the will itself. So I'm going to just show you how eState will do that. So if you want whatever insurance declaration or designation that you've done to appear in the will itself, you go to the designation options and you make sure that it shows insurance declaration here. If it didn't, this would be empty. It wouldn't show insurance declaration. You'd have to say add content. I want my insurance declaration to be in the will. Done. And now it will automatically populate in the will. Some people like it. I don't personally put my insurance declarations in the will. I have it in a separate one. Some people prefer it. It's up to you, however you like to do it. But you can see what it did. It did the same sort of thing. It said, if Sarah's alive, Sarah's the beneficiary. If Sarah's not alive, pay it to Nick and deal with it on the same terms as my will. Okay. So that's how you use insurance declarations in that way, either in the will or as a separate document. Now I want to show you one other. Let me just show you one other type of designation. So let's say we didn't want it to go on the same terms as the residue. Okay. Instead, we wanted a different, completely different, but complicated designation. In other words, not just to one person, but gift overs and all of those things. How would we do that? Well, we drag the insurance policy in here and we go to the other tab. And instead of picking estate or trustee for residue, we pick trustee for specific distribution. What that means is I can create my own residue clause just for this life insurance policy. So I'm going to click on that. And then what comes up is my residue. I have to create a residue for this life insurance. So I might say, give my sister-in-law, 25% of it with a gift over to her children. And then I might want to give, James, whatever. And I can create complicated trusts and all of those things. It'll do all of those things. Okay. And then it'll appear like this: trustee for specific distribution, this life insurance policy. There's an extra button here that you wouldn't see otherwise, which is I want to amend the actual distribution of this life insurance. So I'm just going to click that button and up comes what I did. And now I can change it around and do whatever I want. Versus I want to remove it completely or change the beneficiary from trustee for specific distribution to trustee for residue or trustee or my estate or a person or whatever. Okay. So that's how that works. And so I'll just show you what that might look like. So I'm going to regenerate the designation in my will. I've chosen to do it in the will. And here's what this says. So this is the more complicated one. So it says, okay, if Sarah's not alive, pay it to Nick, who again, one person or clearly shown who the insurance company has to pay it to. They have to pay it to Nick. They don't worry about the rest of it. So that's easy for them. So they just say it shall be paid to Nick. Okay. Now, what should Nick do with it? Well, he's basically to deal with 25 parts and all of those things here and divide it. And that's what this is going to do. And so eState kind of deals with insurance declarations in that way. So you can have those three different main options, right? There's people, there's trustee for residue, there's trustee for specific distribution. And that's those are the insurance designations, and you can do them either in the will or separately. So that's what we've got there. Any questions? I mean, they're slightly complicated, but any questions there about how this works? Okay. And of course, if you use insurance declarations or designations, you'll see that the probate tax is saved in that particular scenario. So you can show the client the benefit of that. If we did it this way, that'd be great. If instead you just designated it to the estate, right? And the client says, well, I just want to designate it to the estate, then there'll be no probate tax savings when you do that, right? So that's the difference there. Any questions? All right. We sure? Any questions about eState generally? Joint last to die. So those are difficult because the designations, we don't actually have that, a designation for that, because it has to be signed by both owners, typically, if there are more, if it's a joint policy. And then the question becomes, okay, whose will how are we going to designate beneficiaries of that? So we haven't yet finalized the way we're going to deal with the joint last to die policies. But we certainly welcome any feedback. We're in touch with the life insurance, some of the representatives of the life insurance industry and companies there, talk to them about that. We want to get it right. So we don't want to put out something that's not right. So that's why we don't deal with that. Can the insurance trust be combined with the estate trust to save costs on associating? That's a good question about using insurance trust, which yeah, it's a real problem because you can only have one graduated rate estate. This wouldn't be a graduated rate estate. It would be a separate, it's excluded. And so you have to balance that, loss of the graduated rate estate benefit on the life insurance if you're doing a separate insurance designation. You can commingle, and eState has an administrative provision that says you can commingle trusts. So I think you could probably do that. The problem is you don't want to do that and taint the graduated rate estate. So you'd want to talk to a tax person before commingling non-graduated rate estate assets, because that otherwise that would taint that graduated rate estate. Sending the declaration to the insurance company, that's why I do a separate insurance declaration. I just want the insurance company to know who to pay it to. I don't want them worrying about anything else. And so yeah, you have to talk to the insurance company. Do they want to see the entire will? Do they just want to see who you're appointing? That's one of the reasons we don't say pay it to my trustees appointed under my will. We name the people again. We say pay it to John Smith, pay it to, if John's not available, pay it to this person. So it's clear exactly who they're paying it to. So that's why we do it that way. Insurance,
Jordy,
yeah,
sorry, Jordy, it's changed. Just like one other point, obviously, you have a graduate rate estate, you'll have the issues of probate, but you also have risks of creditors as well, obviously, if you're having it paid in that fashion. So you have to kind of, I guess, look, as you said, balance that out.
absolutely.
Another question I have is kind of the inconsistencies that I find in our diagnostic testing, where you see the beneficiary designations, insurance trusts, or declarations have not been established, which is seemingly typical. And you'll have a primary beneficiary in those. We'll use life insurance, the example, and then they might establish some contingent beneficiaries, which
Yep.
ultimately might be the children. And
Right.
you've got a survivorship issue because there's a conflict between what the will say in terms of normal gift overs and ultimately the survivorship if one of those children were to predecease. Do you have any thoughts of how that could be handled, like in
Well,
terms of
yeah, if you
how?
want gift overs, so typically you'd say, okay, let's just take the typical situation. This life insurance goes to Sarah. She gets it if she's alive. Sarah's the wife, okay? If Sarah's not alive, I want it to go. Really, the point of that is if you're concerned about gift overs, that is to, one child dies and then you want it to go to the other. Then what you do is you do the trust for residue. For example, if your residue already deals with that, it probably does. And so it's going to say pay it to, Nick, for example, because he's the alternate trustee and Sarah's not alive. Nick then divides it equally between the children, and if any of them are not alive, since the residue already deals with it, it goes to their kids. And so that's how I would deal with anytime, like designation. Same with RSPs. They're not made for complicated situations. They're made for the simplest situation possible, and without gift overs. And because they're not going to get into doing an air search to make sure who the issue of a predeceased child is. And that's why you would want to just say to the insurance company, just pay it to this Nick, the executor, let him figure out how to divide it up. So that's what I would say about providing for gift overs. Because like I said, you can't really say to an insurance company, pay it to John and Susan, and if John's not alive, pay it to divide it equally among his children or his issue. I mean, they don't know who the children are. Okay? In
Yeah,
it,
it is. It's a tough thing, and one of the things is obviously most people don't go to have their beneficiaries established through their wills. They go directly to the documents to the insurance company. Same thing with with RRSPs or RIFs or FHSAs or whatever you want to talk about in terms of instruments today. But there's this ripe for conflict and challenges down the road as a result of not understanding the differences. So
well, that's the value
sorry for
that
that.
we professionals can add, really. I mean, people don't know about that. And I mean, having the insurance company pay the money into court because Sarah's not alive and now it says divided equally, they put in my children equally, on some designation form, and the life insurance company says, I'm paying it into court, you guys can figure it out. I mean, you've spent, $3,000 trying to solve that problem. So
My discussions with them has been that a letter of declaration where you specify the actual names of the children in that letter as a way of kind of counterbalancing the problem that someone hasn't set up either to the trustee in a residue, as you suggested here, directly, or of course in a declaration itself, right? So, but
Right,
it's
but
been interesting.
that's exactly why we don't allow you to name a class, right? It's not even an option.
Right, exactly. Yeah,
So,
yeah. All right, thank you very much, because this
sure.
is something that's a big problem out there.
Thanks, James. Anybody else before we sign off? So Ian and Susanna are doing this week's Thursday webinar. And next week, Ali Spinner is back, our tax expert on capital gains inclusion amendments and how that's going to affect our clients and ourselves. And Monica, for sure, ask an off-topic question. If it's about eState, I'm happy to answer it. So feel free to unmute and if you want, and just fire away.
Sorry, I was having some difficulty unmuting myself.
No problem.
I just had a question, again, off topic. I was wondering if I could just cover it here quickly.
Sure.
I recently have realized that maybe I think eState is populating certain things into my documents that it's not. There were just two questions. One of the user tutorials that you did recently mentioned that if you put in a company as like a professional estate trustee as
Yes.
an executor, so in the appointments, right? If you name one of the trust corporations, like Royal Trust, for example,
Okay.
you mentioned that it populates the Royal Trust provisions into the document itself. Does
Yep.
that do that automatically?
Yeah.
And will it do it into like multiple wills, single
Yep.
wills, whatever it may be?
Yeah. So right now I just named Royal Trust here.
Yeah.
I'm doing a short will here. So what it did was, if we go down to the powers, it changed all of the trustees. Here's Royal Trust's power for investment. Okay. Here's their burden of custody. Here's their authorized depositories. So it's putting in all of their
I
provisions.
wonder if I did something wrong or if maybe I didn't
Yeah, it
find
should automatically put
in
all
there.
of them in.
Yeah.
And yeah, it does that.
Okay. So I'm not sure what would have happened
Just make sure that you didn't do this, which we found some people who did. They said, "Oh, I want to add a new trustee," and I put them in as a person, right? If you put in Royal Trust like this or something, well, it doesn't know it doesn't
Right,
know
of
it's a
course.
trust company. So as long as you pick it from this list, it's going to know that.
Yeah, I can't imagine. Oh, maybe. I gotta go back and look at that. Maybe I
Just
didn't.
jump on a Zoom with us, Monica. Just if you want, just reach out, hit the question mark, and we'll jump on a Zoom with you. Just hit there and
Okay, amazing.
just go like that, and we're on live chat down here. Boom. Just say, "Can I?"
Amazing. I will do that.
Yeah,
Should I address one more question here or just do
sure,
that on the Zoom?
sure. No, you can. Well, go ahead. That's a good for.
Okay, so in my insights for a particular file, I
Yes.
have okay, so what's happened here is that there are a couple of mortgages that have been given to children, and
Okay.
they are like I've put in the hotspot clauses.
Okay.
But it says in the insights include definition of X mortgage or whatever.
Right. If you're referring to a specific mortgage, like what eState does is anytime we're using we're giving an asset away, specifically, it's like it just reminds you, like just make sure it's well defined what you're giving
So
away.
how do I define it? I guess was my next question. Like,
So
how
it
do I go
depends
and
what
define
you're
it?
doing with it. I mean, if you're just referring to, I've advanced, $100,000 to my daughter. I think that's fine, right? You're not gifting that more. You're not saying I want to gift the mortgage that I've given to John Smith to Sue, right? That's when you really need to define it.
Right, right. I understand what you're saying, but where do I put, like, can I put that in the program or I'll just manually
Oh, you do it.
put
Oh,
that
I'm
in
sorry.
after?
You do it manually. You would do it manually.
Okay, okay, understood. Okay, so
Yeah.
that's fine. That covered that. Thank you
The
very
other way
much.
you could do it, if you wanted, is in the name of the asset. That's what's going to populate. So if I said bank account number 3512 at TD Bank, right? if that's the definition I wanted it to say, then that's what's
Yep.
going to print out.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, got it. Perfect. Thanks very much.
Thanks. Any questions like that anytime? Obviously that's what this forum is for, because it's not just you, Monica, who wants to know that. It's other
Yeah, for
people.
sure.
Yeah. But always remember that question mark. Don't struggle. Don't wait till Tuesday. Just click on that button, live chat or browse support. And then, you can browse our support. We have a really robust help desk, but we also have live. So don't wait.
Perfect.
Act now.
Thank you very much.
Well, thanks everybody, and I hope you have a great rest of the week. And we'll see you again. Hopefully, we'll see you on Thursday, and if not, we'll see you again next Tuesday. Thanks.